That evening in Chicago, I was seated in the banquet hall of one of the older hotels on Michigan Avenue, surrounded by clients, heavy crystal glasses, white tablecloths, and the low shimmer of chandeliers that turned every glass of wine into a tiny flicker of fire. The setting was exactly what it was supposed to be: respectable, polished, expensive, designed to impress. I was midway through discussing contract extensions with a representative when my phone began to vibrate in my jacket pocket. The screen lit up with her name, Olivia. She almost never called me during work functions. If she needed me, she would text. A call meant something unusual, but at that moment I assumed it was either a mistake or something minor. My hand hovered over the screen, ready to silence the vibration, when the call didn't end. Instead, the phone connected, and within a second the speaker picked up sound from the other end. At first it was muffled background noise. Then came a laugh. A man's laugh, low and confident, the kind of sound that doesn't mistake its own place in the room. I recognized it instantly. Ben Carter, Olivia's new boss. And then his voice, casual and in asterisk mate. "Let's continue in the suite, it'll be quieter there. We can order more wine." Her laughter followed, unmistakable, pitched just slightly higher than normal, the way she laughed when she wanted to be seen as effortless. The words hollowed me out. It wasn't a sudden blow, not a punch to the chest. It was more like someone had quietly switched off the lights inside me. I sat frozen with the phone in my hand, listening, unable to convince myself it was anything other than what it was. An accidental call, connecting me to a moment I was never meant to hear. I stood abruptly, muttered something to excuse myself, and walked out of the hall. The clatter of silverware and laughter of clients faded behind me. My heartbeat wasn't fast, but it was heavy, deliberate, as if each thud weighed more than the last. Upstairs was a restaurant that Olivia and her colleagues favored after presentations. It had its own private area and tall windows overlooking the street. I knew where to look. Through the glass doors I saw them. Ben sat at a table near the window, leaned back, relaxed, every movement radiating ownership of the space. Olivia stood close beside him, fingers adjusting his cuff as though it were her right to touch him that way. The gesture was too practiced, too natural. There was a tilt to her smile, a glint in her eyes that wasn't professional. And on the table, next to two half-empty glasses, lay a hotel keycard and a receipt for 2 drinks. 2 lines of ink, enough to collapse any illusion of innocence. I stepped into the room. She was the first to notice me, and in that instant, I saw something that unsettled me more than guilt would have. Her face didn't betray panic or embarrassment. It didn't even flinch. She turned toward me as though my presence had been accounted for all along. Her explanations flowed with the ease of someone rehearsed. The call? An accident when she pulled her phone from her bag. The keycard? A prize from a corporate raffle earlier in the evening. The proximity between her and Ben? Nothing more than a team ritual before a toast. A harmless gesture of camaraderie. Around us, the table roared with laughter and chatter. Her story dissolved into the noise, covered by clinking glasses and joking voices. To anyone else in the room, there was nothing amiss. I was the only one who heard the silence beneath it, the weight in the details that no one else cared to notice. I took a seat, nodded at a passing toast, even raised my glass, but inside everything had shifted. I wasn't looking at Olivia and Ben anymore. I was watching the structure of trust in my life start to fracture. I was watching a play in which I had been given the role of the oblivious husband, and every line spoken was meant to keep me in character. I hardly touched my food. The steak cooled on the plate, the wine remained full in the glass. Instead, my eyes catalogued the small betrayals. The way her hand lingered on his wrist a beat too long. The way he leaned toward her when speaking low. The way her laughter sharpened whenever his words carried a private edge. To the others, it was corporate levity, nothing more. To me, it was a language I understood too well. I knew her laugh. I knew her pauses, her subtleties. These weren't the gestures of friendship or professionalism. They were something else entirely. By the time the evening ended, the trappings of formality meant nothing. We rode back in silence. She sat with the same calm posture she always carried, her expression composed, a mask perfectly fitted. She made no attempt to bridge the silence, no slip that betrayed nervousness. I didn't ask questions. Not yet, but a fact had rooted itself in me. This was the first signal, clear and undeniable. She could cloak it in humor, in coincidence, in rituals and raffles, but I had seen and heard enough to know that something had already shifted. That night, lying awake, I replayed every detail. The call, his voice, the keycard, her fingers on his sleeve, her ability to fold it all into a scene that made me look like the overthinking spouse, the one who couldn't take a joke. But I wasn't imagining it. Trust, I realized, is not air. You can't simply open the window and breathe more of it back in once it's gone. It doesn't replenish itself after being drained. It empties, leaving residue. That residue had settled deep inside me. I knew from that night forward, I would start collecting details. Watching, listening, not her words but her patterns. I would become an archivist of small betrayals, no matter how she dressed them up. The first crack had appeared in the wall. To everyone else, it still looked whole. To me, it was already collapsing from the inside. In the days that followed that dinner in Chicago, I couldn't silence the images that had burned themselves into my mind. The accidental phone call, the laugh, the keycard on the table. They repeated in loops whenever I closed my eyes. But what unsettled me more was the realization that this wasn't a sudden fracture. It was the moment I finally noticed the cracks that had been forming for months. Once I let myself revisit the past, the pattern became obvious, like a mosaic snapping into place. The first piece was her phone. Olivia used to leave it lying around freely, unlocked, screen lighting up with messages she barely glanced at. Somewhere in the last 6 months, that changed. Her phone was always face down, always locked with a passcode she hadn't shared with me. Notifications no longer flashed on the screen. Only the silent glow of an alert she would scoop up quickly. At first I dismissed it as a new habit, maybe security consciousness. But looking back now, it was the earliest signal of something she wanted hidden. Then there was the matter of her location. Olivia had once shared her geolocation with me casually, the kind of trust you build after years of knowing there was nothing to hide. We used it more for convenience than anything else. If she was running late, I'd glance at it to know where she was. But suddenly, her sharing disappeared. I remember the first time I noticed. She said she was working late at the office, but when I opened the app, the map showed nothing. Just a blank circle where her name used to be. She claimed the feature drained her battery, and she had switched it off. At the time, I let it go. Now it felt like an erased breadcrumb trail. Her nights grew longer. She called them strategic sessions, late brainstorming meetings for upcoming campaigns. They stretched until dawn, with her stumbling in, heels in hand, exhaustion on her face. Yet the exhaustion was inconsistent. Sometimes she looked genuinely drained. Other times her energy buzzed as though she'd spent the night not in meetings but in some intoxication of her own making. I remember one particular morning. The scent on her clothes wasn't coffee and paper. It was an unfamiliar cologne mixed with wine. She laughed it off, claimed she had hugged a client goodnight. I stored that detail away. The taxi reports became another tile in the pattern. I had access to our shared account for expense tracking, and I noticed repeat charges. Pickups near her office, drop-offs near the river hotels, often around midnight or later. At first, I tried to explain them. Maybe client dinners ran late. Maybe the drivers logged the wrong location. But the more I scrolled, the less room there was for innocent mistakes. It wasn't 1 or 2 rides. It was a string of them, always to the same cluster of addresses near Lake Shore. Then came the Instagram story that shattered more of my denial. Not Olivia's own post. She was careful never to broadcast anything questionable. It was a story from a young intern in her office, someone who tagged freely and didn't censor herself. One clip showed Olivia at a wine bar, standing far too close to Ben Carter. He leaned down, whispering something into her ear, and she threw her head back in a laugh that looked more personal than professional. Her hand brushed his arm in that same too familiar way I'd seen at the restaurant. She looked comfortable. She looked alive. She didn't look like someone stuck at a late-night strategy meeting. New perfume appeared on her dresser, A brand I knew she hadn't bought before. Expensive, distinct. When I asked, she said it was a gift from her team after they closed a successful project. The bottle gleamed in its box, tied with a ribbon too elegant for something from a group of co-workers. The scent lingered in the bedroom long after she left for work, and each time it did, I felt more suffocated. Even her wedding ring began to vanish at odd times. She used to keep it on always, even in the shower, saying she felt naked without it. Now, she claimed she removed it for presentations because it caught on her clothing or distracted during hand gestures. But I knew her. She wasn't the type to worry about such things. The absence of the ring was more telling than its presence could ever be. At her office, I noticed another inconsistency. When visiting once to pick her up, I passed through the lobby and glanced at the visitor log. Her name appeared multiple times, not under her primary badge but linked to 2 additional temporary access cards. The receptionist mentioned she had requested extras for after-hours convenience. Why would she need more than one? The logs showed late-night entries, long after her supposed team sessions had ended. Piece by piece, the evidence assembled itself into a picture I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just one moment in a restaurant, one laugh, one keycard. It was the accumulation of small decisions, each one crafted to deflect suspicion while quietly carving out another life. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one night, spreading out my notes like a detective working a case. Taxi receipts, Instagram screensh *TS, credit card charges. I lined them up in front of me, my pen tapping against the wood. It looked absurd, paranoid even, to gather so many scraps. But together they formed a pattern too steady to dismiss. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how long I had ignored my own instincts. How many times I had believed her explanations, convinced myself the oddities were harmless. I had given her the benefit of the doubt until doubt was the only thing left. I kept replaying the way she had brushed it all aside at the dinner, turning a near exposure into a harmless story, letting the laughter of others shield her. I saw now that it wasn't a one-time trick. It was a SK*LL she had honed, the ability to twist suspicion into coincidence, to cloak deceit in normalcy. From that point forward, I promised myself one thing. I would stop looking away. I would stop handing her easy exits. I would follow the pattern to wherever it led, no matter how much it demanded of me. Because denial had become the heaviest weight of all, and I couldn't carry it any longer. It didn't take long for speculation to turn into certainty. Suspicion, when fed by enough small details, eventually demands proof. And proof has a way of surfacing when you finally decide to stop pretending it isn't there. Mine arrived sooner than I expected, in the same week as that disastrous business dinner. I had slipped a small tracking device, an AirTag, into Olivia's overnight bag weeks earlier, back when the late-night sessions first became too frequent to ignore. At the time I told myself it was precautionary, a way to quiet my restless mind. But the truth was simpler. I didn't trust her. Not anymore. And I needed to know where she went when she said she was working. That Thursday evening, she left the house in her tailored suit, bags slung over her shoulder, telling me she had another strategy session. Her tone was light, dismissive, as if she expected me not to care. As soon as the door shut, I opened the tracking app on my phone. The small dot moved across the city map, steady, deliberate, heading not toward her office but toward the hotels near Lakeshore Drive. I watched the dot settle at one of the most prominent towers, pulsed there, motionless. My pulse did the opposite, hammering harder with every passing minute. I drove. The city lights smeared against the windshield as I pressed forward, the traffic lights changing but barely registering. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they needed to. I kept asking myself what I would do when I arrived. Part of me clung to the faint hope that the tracker was wrong, that it had latched onto someone else's signal. But the closer I came, the less believable that hope became. The hotel lobby was sleek, polished, and quiet at that hour. I walked past the concierge, pretending calm, and moved toward the bank of elevators. And then I saw them. Olivia and Ben stepped inside one of the elevators together. Her head tilted toward his shoulder, his hand pressed lightly against her lower back. They were laughing. And then, as the doors began to close, they kissed. Not cautiously, not fleetingly, but with the ease of two people who had done it many times before. The doors sealed shut, leaving me staring at my reflection in the polished steel. For a moment the world muted. The sounds of the lobby, the distant footsteps, all receded. Only the image of them remained, burned into me. I forced myself to move. At the front desk, I approached the night clerk, my voice steady though my insides shook. I claimed I needed a copy of the receipt for corporate records. The clerk, unbothered and efficient, printed it out and slid it across the counter. My eyes scanned the paper, and each line cut deeper than the last. Room for two. Dinner service delivered late to their floor. 2 glasses of wine charged to the room. All billed to Olivia's corporate card. There it was, black and white. Not suspicion, not a guess, not a story that could be twisted into innocence. Hard proof, undeniable, sitting in my hands. I left the lobby and sat in my car, the receipt trembling between my fingers. For years, I had believed that betrayal would feel like fire, an explosion that ripped everything apart at once. But it wasn't fire. It was ice, a cold that spread through my veins, numbing everything in its path. I stayed there for nearly an hour, staring at the dashboard, trying to breathe. The night pressed down around me, heavy, suffocating. I imagined her upstairs, imagined what they were doing, and every image tore into me like glass. Yet, even then, part of me analyzed, cataloged, stored the evidence. Proof mattered more than pain. Pain fades. Proof lingers. When dawn came, I walked back inside, calmer than I had any right to be. I asked the same clerk for a printed invoice again, claiming I had misplaced the first. He obliged, and I tucked it carefully into my folder, alongside screensh *TS of the AirTag's location. By the time Olivia returned home the next morning, her hair damp from the shower she had taken at the hotel, I had already locked the evidence away in my desk drawer. She breezed in with a casual smile, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and dropped her bag by the door. She said the session had been productive, though she looked far too rested for someone who had supposedly spent the night strategizing. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation, I realized, was for people still fighting to preserve something. I was beyond that. I needed more than words exchanged in anger. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. So I played the role she expected, the trusting husband, too preoccupied with his own obligations to question hers. And all the while I knew the truth. The direct proof had arrived. I had watched her disappear into that elevator with another man. I had seen them kiss. I had held the receipt in my hands. There was no more room for explanations, no more excuses that could veil what had been exposed. And yet, I felt no urge to scream, no instinct to demand answers. Instead, I felt something quieter but heavier. The certainty that my marriage, the life I had built, no longer belonged to me. It had already been carried upstairs in the arms of another man. Discovery doesn't always come as a dramatic scene in a hotel lobby or a caught kiss behind closing doors. Sometimes it's quieter, more insidious, a theft so personal that it rearranges your understanding of everything you thought was yours. For me, it came in the form of an absence, a missing object in my workshop. My workshop had always been my refuge. Tucked in the back of the house, lined with shelves of wood and brass, it was where I restored old timepieces. Pocket watches, carriage clocks, grandfather clocks that carried the memory of generations. Each tick and chime felt like proof that the past could still have a heartbeat. Among all of them, there was one piece that mattered most. A 1930s family metronome, heavy mahogany with a brass pendulum, passed down from my grandfather. It wasn't valuable in the monetary sense, but it carried weight beyond price. It was the sound of lineage, of evenings when my father tuned the piano in our living room, of childhood moments when I thought its steady pulse would outlast us all. One evening, while I was reorganizing, I noticed it was gone. At first, I thought I had misplaced it, that it had been moved during cleaning. But after searching every shelf, every cabinet, I knew it hadn't been misplaced. It had been taken. The realization carried a peculiar sting. Who would take it? Who even knew it mattered enough to steal? Only Olivia. She knew its value to me, knew the story behind it. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I turned to my records. I kept a journal for my orders, names of clients, dates, the types of restoration requested. It was more habit than necessity, a way of grounding myself. Flipping through the pages, my eye froze on a line written in a handwriting that wasn't mine. A small entry, tucked between my usual scrawls: Ben Carter, wall clock, engraving, delivery. The ink was fresh. The slant of the letters was hers. Olivia's handwriting, distinctive, with the way her R's curved too tightly and her A's leaned forward as though impatient. My chest hollowed out as I stared at it. The metronome was missing. And here, in my own book, she had left a trail, a commission for him arranged in my workshop under my nose. I turned to my computer next. In my documents folder was a draft of a letter. It wasn't signed, but the style was unmistakable. The phrasing, the rhythm of sentences, the way she strung words together. It was hers. The letter read like an instruction. He won't suspect. Make sure it's delivered by Friday. Beside the keyboard, half buried under receipts, lay a folded shipping slip. I unfolded it with hands that shook, not from rage but from recognition. The delivery address was Ben Carter's office. It all fit together too easily. The heirloom wasn't simply stolen. It was repurposed, rewritten into her private script. She had taken what was mine, what represented history and continuity, and redirected it into a performance for him. And she had done it using me, my SK*LLS, my access, my workshop. I was no longer just the oblivious husband. I had been made into an unwitting accomplice. I sat there, the documents spread across the desk, the silence of the room pressing down like weight. It wasn't just betrayal of the body, of vows of int asterisk Macy. It was betrayal of trust at its deepest root. She had stolen from my very sense of self. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the phantom tick of the metronome, even though it wasn't there. My mind filled in the sound, a cruel echo of what had been taken. Every pulse reminded me that she had used me as part of her theater, that my tools, my hours, my heritage had been bent to serve someone else. I began to notice smaller things too. A missing brass gear here, a clock face replaced by a cheaper one, certain supplies dwindling faster than I remembered. They weren't accidents. She had been siphoning pieces, embedding herself in the seams of my craft, blurring the line between my world and his. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was sabotage. The next morning, I locked the workshop for the first time in years. The key felt heavy in my palm. It was a boundary I had never needed with Olivia before, but now it felt essential. I couldn't stop her from lying, but I could stop her from touching what was mine. As I closed the door, I felt a flicker of clarity. The affair wasn't random passion, wasn't even just a reckless mistake. It was structured, deliberate, designed with layers. And the missing metronome was proof of that design. She wasn't only sneaking around with another man. She was weaving her life out of masks and thefts, each disguise built on the ashes of what she took from me. I had proof of betrayal in the hotel receipt. Now I had proof of sabotage in my workshop. Each revelation carried its own kind of wound, but together they told a story more sinister than I had been willing to consider. She hadn't just lied. She had rewritten the roles entirely. And in that rewriting, she had cast me not as husband, not even as victim, but as supplier. A man stripped of ownership, reduced to a background presence who unknowingly funded her performance. The weight of that truth sat heavier than the absence of the metronome itself. By the time I pieced together the theft of the metronome and the forged order in my journal, I knew avoidance was no longer an option. Proof without confrontation was like holding a blade without using it, sharp, dangerous, but ultimately inert. I needed to push further, not with speculation but with something undeniable. And for that, I had to walk directly into the lion's den, Ben Carter's office. I chose a Friday afternoon. The building where his company leased space was all glass and steel, towering over the river, its lobby echoing with the kind of modern emptiness meant to impress investors. I carried a folder under my arm, but it wasn't contracts or proposals inside. It was the collection of evidence I had been gathering. The hotel receipts, the taxi reports, **TS, and copies of Olivia's handwritten notes, proof lined in neat paper edges. When I entered the reception area of his floor, the assistant didn't even look surprised to see me. She waved me toward the inner corridor as though my arrival had been expected. That small gesture chilled me more than I anticipated. Had Olivia prepared him for this? Or was I simply walking into a theater where my role had been scripted long ago? Ben Carter was waiting in his office, leaning against the desk with his jacket off and sleeves rolled, the casual posture of a man who believed he controlled the scene. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he gestured toward a chair, as if I were the visitor, the petitioner. Before I could speak, he did. His words were clipped, almost rehearsed. He admitted that his relationship with Olivia had already ended. He stressed that it had been brief, complicated, unfortunate. The kind of phrasing corporate men use to file a disaster into manageable paperwork. But then he surprised me. He opened a drawer, pulled out a slim black case, and set it on the desk. Inside were a series of USB drives, each labeled with dates and times. He explained, with the same detachment one might use when reviewing financials, that the building kept security footage of after-hours access. Olivia, he said, had used her temporary badges to enter late at night. On several occasions, she hadn't been alone. He slid one of the drives across to me. The footage, he explained, showed her arriving at 3:13 a.m., carrying a red sports bag, accompanied by a man he didn't recognize. They bypassed the main work area and went directly to an isolated conference room she had requested for pitch practice without distractions. He added that she had insisted on the room being off-network, no security interruptions, no cleaning staff access. He said it almost with admiration, as if she were clever for finding the blind spots. I felt my throat dry as he continued. He mentioned the clock, the very one I had seen listed in my order journal. She had delivered it to him, engraved and polished, but he claimed he had never taken it home. Instead, he had sent it to an off-site storage facility. He handed me a sheet of paper with the address, the storage unit number, and, most shocking of all, my name listed as the recipient. He had signed it over to me, washing his hands of the object, of the history entangled with it. It was a strange performance. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't apologetic. He was deliberate, as though removing himself from the equation, as though saying, "She is not my problem anymore. She is yours." I left the office with the drive in my pocket and the paper folded tightly in my hand. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been for late spring, sharp against my skin. I walked to my car with the peculiar sensation of being both relieved and condemned. Relieved because I finally had confirmation beyond doubt. Condemned because confirmation leaves no room for hope. That night, I plugged the drive into my computer. The footage was grainy, black and white, but it didn't need clarity to wound. There she was, Olivia, my wife, the woman who once swore she couldn't sleep without me beside her, walking into a sterile corporate hallway at 3 in the morning. She carried the red sports bag I had never seen in our home. Beside her, a man whose face was partially obscured by the camera angle. Their bodies leaned toward each other in a way colleagues never would. They disappeared into the conference room, and the camera captured only the closed door. But absence, I realized, can be as loud as presence. The missing frames between entry and exit told the story clearly enough. Hours later, they reemerged, her hair tousled, his jacket slung casually over his shoulder. They left separately, but the damage was already done. I sat in the glow of the monitor long after the footage ended. I replayed it again and again, not because I doubted what I had seen, but because I couldn't yet absorb it. Every time the image froze on her face, angled toward him, my chest constricted. It wasn't a stranger's face. It was Olivia's, the same face I had traced with my hand on quiet mornings, the face I thought I knew better than my own. And yet here it was, unfamiliar in its ease with deceit. By dawn, I printed stills from the footage, adding them to the folder. The evidence pile thickened, heavy as stone. Proof had become my currency, and I kept hoarding it, even as each new piece carved deeper into me. What unsettled me most was not just the betrayal itself, but the machinery behind it. Olivia wasn't improvising. She was orchestrating. Temporary badges, isolated rooms, gifts funneled through my workshop, objects hidden in storage units under false names. It was an architecture of deceit, layered and deliberate, and I, until now, had been blind to its scaffolding. As I locked the folder and hid the drive away, I realized something else. I wasn't only documenting her fall. I was documenting mine. Each file, each receipt, each still frame was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I lived. And yet I couldn't stop, because once you know, you can never unknow. And once you see the truth, even in grainy footage, it brands itself on your memory forever. At the storage facility, I found the clock wrapped in brown paper, tagged under my name. Lifting it, I felt its weight heavier than memory. Inside the casing, a false panel slid open to reveal envelopes. Forged IDs, prepaid cards, rental agreements under aliases. Her name appeared in variations across cities. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was a double life, built carefully, layer by layer, with my SK*LLS fueling it. I met Olivia in a rundown cafe, the kind where shadows linger longer than the customers. She admitted what I already knew: fear drove her sabotage. Destruction was her comfort. She slid a thick envelope of money toward me, but I pushed it back. I took the heirloom clock and the old metronome, restored them to my workshop, and hung them on the wall. Their ticking steadied me. Her masks could stay outside. My clarity had finally returned.